Welcome to a special edition of Crawford County Outdoors. I'm Dwayne Kohler, and we are at the Conneaut Lake Sportsman's Club today, joined by Julia Catalano from the Conneaut Historical Society.
Thank you. Glad to have you here, Dwayne.
What are we doing today?
So today we have a program that is presented by Emily Borcz from the Pymatuning State Park, and she's going to be talking about the history of Pymatuning. It has a lot of very cool history, natural history about building the dam, the flood control, the recreation, a lot of interesting things. So we're looking forward to having her
I'm
here.
really looking forward to learning about all that.
Yeah.
I last year went out and we filmed the walleye tournament out there, and that was really something.
Yeah.
And like again, Pymatuning, everybody sees the ducks walking on the fish and all those kind of things. But there's a lot to learn, I think.
Yeah. In terms of building the dam, it was built during the Depression, it started in the early 30s. For flood control, and also to have water for the industries farther down river in the Shenango River, because there's a lot of towns and cities down there and a lot of industries, and also of course for recreation, which is terrific. So it's a great place, as many of us know, a great place for boating, for fishing, for camping. Real low-key, nice atmosphere of Pymatuning.
Well, I'm really looking forward to that. So let's go to the presentation.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
We're very happy to have Emily Borcz here to do a program for us on Pymatuning. We're the Conneaut Lake Area Historical Society, and Pymatuning is definitely in our area, and it has got a very interesting history. I got to know Emily. She did a program for our garden club. And so she is the Environmental Education Specialist, Department of Conservation and Natural Resources at Pymatuning State Park. And so we're very happy to have Emily, so I will turn this over to her.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me out tonight. I'm happy to be here. I was just saying on my way over, I was glad that I'm not in the park tonight in like a pavilion or something like that. I'm very happy to be inside. So thank you for having me out. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to go through, talk a little bit about the history of Pymatuning. Myself and the other educator at Pymatuning usually try to do a history tour of the park at least once a year, if not more often than that. So this is based on a tour that we did last fall, and it kind of goes around the park. It's not necessarily in chronological order, but it's in the order that we went around the park and where you can see different things around the park. So hopefully you'll take some of this information and use it and come visit us and visit some of these sites. So just some basic stuff about Pennsylvania State Parks and Pymatuning in general. So our mission of Pennsylvania State Parks is to protect and conserve our natural resources for current and future generations to use and enjoy. Does anybody think they know how many state parks we have in Pennsylvania? You guys have a guess?
117.
Ooh, that's a good guess. So it used to be 117, and then we started to include our environmental education centers. And then I think we added one more park. So we're at 121 state parks. So there was 3 education centers, and then they recently added Washington Crossing Historic Park out in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So we have 121 state parks. They're all unique in their own way. What kind of makes Pymatuning unique? What do you guys think? As far as a state park?
Best one in the state.
Best one in the state? Yeah, that's what we think, for sure. Why is it the best? What do you like about it? What do you guys, those of you that come out to visit, what do you like to do when you come out?
Oh, the walk, to see the fish walk.
Yeah, the fish, someone said fishing, boating on the lake. So we have the largest reservoir in Pennsylvania, so it's over 17,000 acres of water. It holds back, I think it's 64 billion gallons of water in the dam there, in the reservoir. And then it's 70 miles of shoreline, and at the deepest, it's about 35 feet deep at the deepest part of the lake near the dam. On average, it's anywhere from 10 to 17 on average. So on the northern part of the causeway, it's about 10 feet average depth, and then on the southern part, it's about 17 feet average depth. So really some good stats there. But yeah, so we have the largest lake. What else? Someone said the fish, right? So the spillway, the fish, it's where you've probably heard that the ducks walk on top of the fish's back because it's so thick with fish, and we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit. So that's definitely a unique feature. It's the only place in Pennsylvania state parks where they allow people to feed wildlife. And we ask that you just feed the fish, try not to feed the ducks, even though they fight for that bread. But yeah, anything else?
A friend of mine took his kids around, drove around through there and saw 4 eagle nests.
Yes, we are known for our eagle's nest. So back in between 1960s and 80s, when the eagles their population took a pretty big plummet across the United States, there was only 3 nesting pairs left in Pennsylvania, and they were all here in the Conneaut Lake and Pymatuning area. So we're really part of that comeback story. At the park now, we think there's at least 16 nests that we've been told about, and then across Pennsylvania now we have over 350 nesting pairs, and I heard that number quite a few years ago, so I'm sure it's gone up since then too. So our bald eagle population is doing really, really well, and we never get sick of seeing them. They're great to see. It's beautiful. So yeah, so we're kind of known for that. What else? Anything else?
Share it with another state.
Yes, so we share it with the Ohio side of Pymatuning, for sure, so that's kind of unique. Yeah, so those are kind of the things that make us a little special and unique compared to some of the other parks here in Pennsylvania. So that's just a map of the park there, so you can see it kind of makes like a nice big U shape. That tan part on the right-hand side is a propagation area and is managed by the Pennsylvania Game Commission. The green part is all the land that's managed by, it's that little green that you see around the lake, managed by the state park, and then obviously the lake that we have there too. So our history is pretty unique. So I'm going to kind of start with the dam and the gatehouse area. So this is a picture of them kind of trucking in dirt and moving dirt and stuff to build the dam. So it was started in 1931 is when they started building the dam, and there was 3 parts to that project. So there was the dam, there was, including the gatehouse, and then there was the spillway and the causeway. So those are 3 main areas that they were looking at. So they're moving all of that dirt. So the trucks that they used, I think that's a picture. So there's one of those old-timey trucks that they used. It could go about 40 to 45 miles per hour, and at that time it was pretty fast. So there was 2 crews that worked about 10-hour shifts. And they would do that work. It employed about 7,000 men. And they were in 3 different camps throughout the Pymatuning area. And so they made about $3.15 a day, and most of that would be sent home to their families. That was during the Great Depression, and so that money was sent home to their families, and they were given meals every day, they were given a place to sleep, and a bed and everything like they needed, so they really needed to hold on to that money. This is them kind of putting their steel pylons in the dam that they would put into there to kind of reinforce the dam itself. So it is an earthen dam, and they did all that work. You can see then they also use locally quarried sandstone to kind of face the dam and to kind of finish it off. So if you've ever been down there, you'll see that. It's really a beautiful handiwork that they have down there. So that's kind of looking at the dam from below it, at the outflow. So you're kind of looking up towards the dam at the outflow. And so you can see it kind of steps out, and that helps the water so that it doesn't erode that land and everything around. It kind of slows it down and lets it flow out nice and relatively slowly. And then you can see here, so this is prior to the gatehouse being built. It's kind of the base of that gatehouse, and so you can see there's like, let me see if I can. So anyways, you can see sort of in this picture that there's some, it's when they were putting up all the gatehouse and everything like that. So inside the gatehouse is what helps control the water flow. So basically there was 3 reasons that the dam was built. The primary reason was to allow water to flow downriver into the Shenango River to provide water for the industries that were along the Shenango and Beaver Rivers. And then the secondary was to hold back flood water. And then the 3rd reason was for recreation and wildlife. And so they built that gatehouse so they could regulate that water. So, and it is kind of monitored by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So every day we send them information about how much rain we've gotten over the last 24 hours, what the water level is, and then you know, what the gates are at, how much water is flowing out of the gates. So if the Shenango River starts to flood, we can hold back some water. If it's getting low, we can let some out. So that's kind of all regulated by that sort of U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I mean, we do that in-house. We do all that work and open those gates and things like that. We can do it electronically, or if that fails, there is a way to do it manually as well. So during our history tours, we do usually do like gatehouse tours where you can go inside and see around. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And then you can see it completed. So like I said, the third project, or one of the 3 projects, was the spillway area. So you can see here, the spillway was built, so that's kind of considered the upper reservoir. If you're standing at the spillway, looking at the bowl, and then that whole big lake area, the upper reservoir, it's called Sanctuary Lake. Some of you may have heard it called that before. So it's a propagation area. It's set aside just for wildlife propagation. And so there's no boating or fishing or anything like that for the public. And that, like I said, is managed by the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And so, but it was, Gifford Pinchot was the governor of Pennsylvania during the time of the building of the dam. And it was his idea to have like an area set aside for wildlife. So that's one of the reasons they have that area, which is pretty interesting. So then the spillway itself is kind of just a natural, because the water flows over that. I think the Sanctuary Lake is about 3 feet higher than the lake level of the lower reservoir. So it naturally just flows over that little dam, that little spillway area. And originally it collected all the things that fish eat. So, you know, aquatic insects and plant material and things like that. And so the fish started to congregate there kind of on their own because they had a good food source. And then all of a sudden people thought, oh wow, we can feed them and bring more fish. So we get about 400,000 visitors just at the spillway alone per year. Across the whole park, we get about 3 million visitors per year. So 400,000 are just there at the spillway. So this is a picture kind of looking, you're below the spillway, and you're kind of looking up at the spillway underneath the bridge there. And you can see that's where they're doing some construction, moving around a lot of those rocks. They're huge. I don't know how they would even tackle something like that. Another interesting thing about the spillway is that prior to there being a lake, it used to be known for onion farming. So it used to be considered the Great Pymatuning Swamp. And if they drained just a little bit of the water out, they realized the soil was extremely fertile and great for growing onions. So this is just a map of some of the farmers that were in this area. So one of the biggest ones, I think, is somewhere up in here. It's the Borcz farm. And then I recently heard this J&P Russell. So the guy that Jay Russell is, I believe he's the director at Mercer County Conservation District, and he was just saying that his family owned that property, and so it's kind of interesting history there. So prior to the dam being built, there was a pretty big conflict between the people that wanted to drain the swamp. So the farmers wanted to drain the swamp and make more farmland because it was so fertile. There's reports of this area, Linesville area, being known as the onion capital of Pennsylvania, the onion capital east of the Mississippi, and potentially the onion capital of the world. So they definitely wanted, their thought was to drain it and just make more onion fields and really roll with that. But then they realized if you drain that swamp, that the water downriver on the Shenango would dry up. And so they didn't want that to happen because of all the industry down there. Industry was starting to become more and more prevalent and paid more than the onion farming did. And so more people were going to work in the industry. And so Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania government actually bought the land up, the farmers' land on the Pennsylvania side. But the governor, I think it was the governor, didn't agree to that until the Ohio side could guarantee that they could get the land set aside for the lake. And so what ended up happening was the industry that was down the river on the Shenango and Beaver Rivers, those industries, they actually came together and created a land trust. And they're the ones that went in and bought the land off the Ohio farmers. And they actually gave them more, they actually paid them more than the Pennsylvania side got. So they got about, on average, $86 per acre. And when they were able to buy up all the Ohio land, then Pennsylvania state government came in and bought out the Pennsylvania farmers, and they made about $35 per acre. And it was based on, like, if they had more productive land, they definitely got more money. But it's just interesting that the industry could kind of bankroll that on the Ohio side and really make it, they wanted to make it happen. They wanted to definitely buy out the farmers and make sure that that dam was going to get built so they could protect their industry. So this is one of the Bullis farm. So you can see the farm fields just kind of go for, as far as you can see, and all the workers that they had there was probably a lot of family members and neighbors and things like that working on the farm. These are some of the crates that held the onions in them, and then there was the rail lines that ended up coming through to help ship out those onions. This is the causeway. So the causeway, again, was the kind of that third piece of that big project. It spans like a little over a mile across the lake. I think it was like 700,000 tons of dirt they had to move to build that. So it's a pretty amazing feat. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the history of Pymatuning is that we had African American Civilian Conservation Corps in between 1935 and 1938. And so this is kind of a picture of that group of folks. And right now in the park, we actually have, it's paid for through DCNR, but it's through the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they have this crew, this cultural resource crew, that's coming in. We don't know a whole lot about this area of the park. We can see, I think I have a picture here. You can see their camps kind of in the background there, the tents back there. They're kind of cutting down some trees and building some fence rows here. Let me see, this is just some of the pictures from the guys at camp and kind of their everyday lives. And then, so this picture here is from this cultural resource crew. They've been going in there, so I think this one's a little bit hard to see, but there's these old stone rows that kind of lead to the center of the camp. They come in from all different angles, and so we knew where those were, but this cultural resource crew is kind of just going through and seeing if they can find any other remnants of that CCC camp. And they are finding some, this is some glass that they found in this too, and it's kind of like higher end glass, so they think it was part of where the officers' barracks was, like right in that area. And then this is like an old shovel that they found, so it's kind of interesting. They're going to be in the state park off and on throughout the summer and into the fall, and kind of really doing some of that research. So hopefully we'll be able to tell more stories and kind of make this area that's a little more accessible to folks, and maybe do some more historical programs in that area. So another unique thing about Pymatuning State Park is that during World War II, Westinghouse in Sharon, Westinghouse Corporation, they were building a wakeless torpedo, and they were using this wakeless torpedo in the war effort, but in order to make sure it was working properly, every time they would change any sort of little detail, they needed to test it to make sure it worked. And so this here is actually in the Westinghouse Corporation. This is called the tea room. So it was super top secret, so they never even used the word torpedo. They always would just refer to it as the tea room. And so this is kind of where those torpedoes were kind of laid out. And then you can see here, these are coils that were used to kind of inside the torpedo to help sort of burn off those gases so that there wasn't a wake. It didn't create that wake, those bubbles and everything like that. This is an area where they called it parkerizing. It was to kind of protect the torpedo from the elements, from corrosion and heat and the elements like that it would come into contact with. out there in the salt water and all of that stuff. So this is one of the women who was testing the torpedoes, like not really testing it, but kind of going through a checklist, making sure everything was the way it was supposed to be. So because of a lot of the men were fighting in the war, their wives and the women took over their jobs here at Westinghouse. And so it employed a lot of women during that time frame in those different positions. So this here, these are torpedo tubes. So when the torpedoes were on the submarines, or if it was on a naval ship or something like that, you would have to back it into a tube, and the tube would be what fires it out. So they wanted to make sure that the torpedoes they were building actually fit into the correct size tubes that were going to be on those ships and submarines, because you wouldn't want it to be too big or too small once it got out there. So they built the tubes in the in Westinghouse itself, and then tested them there. So then you can see they kind of brought it out to Pymatuning. So Pymatuning is about, I think it's about 20, maybe not quite 20 miles north of Sharon. So it was the largest lake. If you remember, the picture of Pymatuning has that nice long area that goes from the dam all the way up to the causeway. So it's about 10 miles that they had to kind of test that straight line up the lake. And so there was a dock that was built. It's actually on the park. We have, the road is called Westinghouse Drive, I think. It takes you down to Westinghouse Bay. It's very near the Jamestown Marina. So if you ever want to get out there and check it out, I suggest you do, because it's cool, because you can actually see how open that water is and how much space they had to kind of work with there. So they're unloading this torpedo. So when they brought them to Pymatuning, obviously they didn't have the warheads on them, but they would put like sand and things inside of it to kind of manage to make the weight the same as what it would be if they were actually using it with the warhead. And so then they're backing that torpedo into that firing tube here. And then this was a test run where it was like a surface test run, so it did create the bubbles, but it's just kind of show how high that water went. I think it was like 20 feet high or something like that. So then this is super interesting. So this is a diver here. The torpedoes were meant to float to the surface so they could be recovered. But if they didn't, what would happen is it would send bubbles up, and I think it would even ignite like a little flare or something like that. And so they would take the barge out, find those where that flare is, and then the divers would go down, hook onto it, and then they would bring it back onto the barge and retrieve them. Because it was such top secret, they didn't want to leave anything in the lake. They didn't want those secrets getting out. So it was super important that they retrieved all of them. Plus, it was so much money and time was spent building those that they didn't want to lose them. So yeah, so those are kind of the big sort of history topics that we have happening at Pymatuning. Do you guys have any questions for me?
I just have a comment.
Oh, so go ahead.
I had also read that mosquitoes were so bad when they were constructing everything that it really took extra time to get people that, could stay healthy from all mosquitoes.
Right, yeah, so it was really hard work. So those 7,000 men that were put to work to build the dam, not only were they building the dam, but they were clearing all the land. So they were clearing the trees and everything like that. They were to have big burn piles, anything that would get in the way and maybe end up by those trash racks and affect the dam itself had to be taken down. And so they were kind of working their way north, and they got north of where the causeway is. Obviously it wasn't there then. But, it was super swampy and super hard to get in and out of. And yes, they had to deal with, the heat and the mosquitoes. And actually, when they built the dam, the story I heard is that it started filling up a lot faster than they thought it would. And so, they even had a hard time getting to some of those northern areas anyways. So I think, if you're ever boating up there, you might see like more stumps and things like that, just because they never could clear that whole area. Because it just filled up a little, faster than they had expected. Yeah.
So how long did it take to fill up?
So it was, they started building in 1931. The dedication was in 1934. So I think it was even just, I've heard like 1933, 1934. So just a couple of years. Yeah.
How deep did you say the water was?
So at its deepest point is near the dam itself, and that's 35 feet. On average, the lower part of the lake below the causeway is about 17 feet deep, and on the northern part it's about 10 feet deep average. Yeah.
Did they work through the winter, guys?
Yes, they did work through the winter, yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Because of the depth of the lake, there's a big walleye tournament over the summertime. Is that a particular fish that reacts to that depth, or are there other kind of fish in there that are
Oh, that's
attracting that
interesting.
fish?
Yeah, so that's interesting you say that. I'm not sure about the affiliation between the depth of the lake and the fish. I do know that we are known for our walleye and crappie type of fish, and then they do have those tournaments throughout the spring and summer. I think there's the crappie tournaments coming up here this weekend, maybe. But anyways, yeah, so that's the Pymatuning Lake Association, and they manage those tournaments. But yeah, it's a very healthy fish population that we have now. The Lake Association helps us with, they help us build what they call fish cribs, so it's like habitat for the fish. And they build those once a year. We build about 100 of those, and they pick an area to kind of put those in the lake, and it provides habitat for the smaller fish to kind of hide out and not get eaten, and gives them a chance to kind of grow and get bigger. And then obviously the Linesville Fish Hatchery, I've heard it's the largest warm water fish hatchery in the world, but I don't know if that's still true, but they do a phenomenal job at helping manage the fish populations and making sure that it's a healthy population in the lake. So yeah, we're doing pretty good Pymatuning as far as that. Yep.
On the spillway where they took the old railroad bed, made that into a bike path?
Yes.
Was there at one time another railroad track parallel to it?
No, so that's a good question though, but that used to be the old railroad grade, and then they had to move it. And I can't remember the reason why they moved it. I think it had to do with the spillway itself and expansion, because if you see some old postcards and stuff from the spillway, people would drive up like right next to it. It used to be really, really close, and now they've kind of moved the road over a little bit. So I think they had to move the rail line a little bit. So it almost looks like a lot of people think it looks like an old canal, but it's not. It's just because they moved that rail bed over a little bit. But it was always the same line. Yeah.
Do you need a separate Ohio license to fish on the Ohio side?
Good question. We get that a lot. So if you are on the water, either one is recognized by both states. So if you're on the water in PA and you have Ohio fishing license, we recognize that. If you're on the land though, say you're on the Ohio land, you need to have Ohio license, fishing license. If you're on the Pennsylvania land side, you need to have a Pennsylvania fishing license. But on the water, it can be either. Anybody else? Yeah.
Is the horsepower limit still 20?
It is, yes.
Horsepower 20?
Mhm. Yep.
Is that possibly because it's impossible to remove all the debris underneath it?
Right.
If you had unlimited horsepower, you'd have problems where a branch or something would just pop up at a bad time and
Right. Yeah, just because it's so shallow. Most of our Pennsylvania state parks are 20 horsepower max. For that reason, they're all man-made reservoirs, and they're just too shallow to really allow that. We also, any sort of changes that we make, there's a compact with the Ohio side, and so everybody has to agree to the terms if we change anything about that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
Was at one time no motors at all permitted, then it went to 5 and 10 and 20?
The only thing I think I had heard was that at one time it was 10, and then
It was 10.
Yeah.
I think it was 5 at one time, and then before that even.
I don't remember, but yeah, that could be true. Yeah.
Yeah, I got this thing in the mail from our representative, that they're reopening Tuttle Point, is that true?
They are, yes. So we hope to be, they just had the initial job conference last week, And I believe they're going to be doing some groundbreaking on that in early May, and then start the construction. So the construction group agency has been determined, and they're going to start that work through the summer. We hope to be open for camping season next year. Yeah.
Did they find very many Indian artifacts whenever they were doing their digging and dredging?
Yeah, so I believe over the years, many people have found them, but a lot of people end up keeping them. Like, we don't have a lot of those artifacts, if any, that I'm aware of. So just over the years, people have kind of collected them and taken them. If you guys know of anything that you have and that you want to donate to the park, we would love to have it. But yeah, so prior to the farmers were some of the first settlers in the area, but prior to that, the area was kind of known for its Native American tribes that lived in that area. So there was the Monongahela, the Delaware, and then there's even some idea that there was the Seneca Indians were in that area as well. The name Pymatuning comes from what they believe is a Delaware chief that was, his name sounded like, it was like Pymatuning or something like that, but it translates to Crooked Mouth Man's dwelling place. And they think it was because there was in some of the referencing thing, it referenced him having like a deformity on his face. So that's where the Crooked Mouth Man's dwelling place comes from. So, yeah. Yeah.
But no Indian burial grounds?
So under the lake, we believe there are two. So the Monongahela are also called mound builders, or also known as that. And so we believe there are two mounds under the lake that were from the Native American, that time frame, yeah. I don't know about any other, I mean, there's definitely people, like I said, people have found arrowheads and things like that. We have some at the park, but I actually don't believe they're found in the park. I just think they're kind of like a representation of what, you know, people have found over the years, but yeah, good questions. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you guys all for having me. I know you have a break coming up, so, and those pictures might have been a little hard to see. I did bring a lot of them with me, so on your break, if you want to come up and kind of look at some of those pictures, please feel free to do so. I'll hang out for a few minutes and be happy to answer any more questions that might come up, so thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that was a very interesting topic, learning everything I never heard about Pymatuning Lake. That was great. Well, thank you for joining us today on Crawford County Outdoors, and we will talk to you next time.